With that, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Tina. Well, I love the topic this month of connecting to what is most meaningful. And often what's most meaningful is connected to passion. And I'm kind of a wordsmith, so one of the things I really enjoy is looking at what words really mean. The word passion obviously means something that you care about. And when you care about something, it can also mean suffering. But it doesn't necessarily have to mean suffering in the sense that we think of suffering as in suffering with pain. But suffering in its original sense of the word meant undergoing. And undergoing meant being tested. And if you think about it, that's true. When there's anything that you really care about, that you're really passionate about, you are willing to be tested. And you will be tested, because nobody gets through this life without being tested. And I always say it's better to be tested on something that you really care about as opposed to something that you don't care about. So that's kind of the importance of passion. I'm also very interested in Greek mythology. And this past June, I had the pleasure and the privilege of taking a conference with Jane Shinoda Bolen, who was the author of Goddesses in Every Woman and Gods in Every Man, which is kind of a classic that came out in the 1980s. And she's now in her late 70s, and I thought, wow, if I ever want to meet her in person, I better do it soon. And she was quite inspirational. One of the myths that is really important to Jungian psychologists is the myth of Psyche and Eros. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Psyche and Eros today, from the standpoint of psychology and Jungian psychology and what that means, what that can mean to us in our personal journeys and connecting to what is most meaningful, and the idea of being tested when you're passionate about something. And towards the end, I'm going to introduce the idea of a guided meditation, thinking about some of the ways that psyche is tested and relating it to your own life, and hopefully bringing you some insights for your own journey. So psyche means soul in Greek, and psyche also means butterfly. And there is a sense that when we enter our own journey and connect to what we're passionate about, we transform from the chrysalis into the butterfly. Eros means love. It's where the word erotic came from. But it doesn't just mean, obviously, sexual or sensual love, but love in all of its manifestations. So Psyche in the Greek myth was this beautiful young woman. She was the youngest daughter of an unnamed king, and she was so beautiful that people said that she was like a second Aphrodite. Well, Aphrodite is the goddess of love and beauty. And in the Greek myths, you don't want to offend any of these big archetypes, because they can often take revenge on you. As we look at this myth, one thing that Jungians do and psychologists sometimes do is to look at every aspect of the myth and every person in the myth as an aspect of yourself, or an aspect of an archetypal or larger-than-life energy that can be present in you. I can tell you, because Tina has mentioned that I'm a ballroom dancer, which was a very unexpected passion for me in a sense. It came on me when I turned 47, and to be in the grip of a kind of archetypal energy, and Terpsichore was one of the muses in ancient Greece. She was the muse of dance. And I can tell you honestly that I have felt in the grip of an archetypal energy, an energy larger than myself in terms of my relationship to ballroom dancing, because I have found it as a way that I've experienced growth and obviously been challenged, especially at a more advanced age to start ballroom dancing, but it has also lifted me up. So as you look at the myth, the myth of Psyche and Eros, you can see different aspects of yourself in it. Anyway, Psyche, beautiful young woman, people start worshiping her as a god or a goddess. They say she's the second Aphrodite, Well, Aphrodite starts to hear of this, and she's not too pleased. And so she says to her son, Eros, Eros is where Cupid comes from. But in this particular version of the story, Eros is not the little baby Cupid with the arrows, but this tall, strapping, adolescent, gorgeous Greek god with wings. And so she says to her son, okay, I want you to go and hit Psyche with an arrow, and when you get hit with these arrows, you fall in love with whatever you next look upon. And there is something that's very irrational about falling in love, whether it's with a person or with an activity or anything like that. There's the sense of, where did this come from? And so for the Greeks, that was being hit by this arrow. Anyway, she says, hit her with an arrow and make sure that the next thing she looks on is the vilest creature you can possibly find. And so Eros goes, all right. So he goes off and he sees Psyche and he falls in love himself. Now, in some versions of the myth, he's so startled by how beautiful she is that he actually pricks himself with his own arrow, and that actually deepens the love that he feels for her. And so he doesn't do what Aphrodite asks him, what his mother asks him to do. In the meantime, the king, the father of Psyche, is getting concerned because she's this beautiful girl. She's starting to be worshipped as a goddess, and that means no human wants to marry her. Nobody in his kingdom can even think of her as a human. And the other two daughters are married off. So he goes to the oracle at Delphi. And the oracle at Delphi is where you go when you need to find out. It's kind of prognostication. It's a psychic thing where you find out what your future might be. And the oracle at Delphi says she's not going to wed anybody human. And the king goes, ugh. And the oracle at Delphi says you need to bring her up to this lonely mountain, dress her as if for a wedding, and leave her there. And the only thing the king can think is, she's going to wed something inhuman, it must be a monster. Because that's all he can think of. It doesn't occur to him that a god might be interested in her. So, Psyche is dressed up. She's brought to this top of this mountain. Everyone is very sad because they think that's the last they're going to see of her. Well, Eros comes along, and he wafts her up to a palace. He puts her to sleep. He wafts her up to a palace, and he disappears. And there's a disembodied voice that says, everything here is yours. Enjoy yourself. All of your needs will be taken care of. And this is very similar to when I would call the honeymoon phase, whether it's with a person or an activity, where you are in love, everything seems to be taken care of. You feel, your heart feels light, you are lifted up, and you've got a lot of energy, and you're just enjoying yourself. And so there's Psyche, and every night, Eros comes to her, but in the dark, so she never sees who he is. She never sees who he is. And they have wonderful nights together. She becomes pregnant, but she's missing her sisters. There's something very similar, if you know the fairy tale of Beauty and the Beast, where Beauty goes away to the Beast's castle, and everything is taken care of, but she misses her sisters. And so she's able to sort of see into their life because she's given a magic looking glass or something. But eventually she wants to go back and visit them. And so the same thing happens here. Psyche can see what's going on with her sisters, that they're mourning her loss. She wants to have her sisters brought to the palace. She wants to spend time with them. So she talks to Eros at night, still not knowing who he is. And he says, this is really a bad idea. Psyche, you're pregnant. You're going to give birth. And if we can keep this secret, you will give birth to a god. If you don't, you're going to give birth to a mortal. And so the stakes are kind of high, but she's still miserable. She wants her sisters to come visit. So the sisters are brought up, and they see how Psyche is living, and they're very jealous. You know, she's got this ideal life. And so they say to her, well, who is your husband? You know, how has he provided all this? And she confesses, I've never seen him. And they're like, What? You have never seen him? And they said, Psyche, you got to get with this. You have to figure out who this is, because you could be married to a monster who's going to eat your child and kill you. And so they fill her head with all of these doubts about what she's got. And that's what happens sometimes. You go unconscious about something, but you're in love with something, and people come in and can sometimes spread doubts, or doubts come from your own mind. And so Psyche, in the middle of the night, when she knows her husband is asleep, she lights a candle, or some versions of the myth, she has a lamp that has oil in it, and she has a dagger in case she has to defend herself. And so she lights the candle, and she sees the most gorgeous man, God, that she's ever seen, with beautiful wings. And she is so startled by it that the candle or the lamp drips oil, and it wakes him up. And in the story, in a Jungian story, you need light, and you need something that will help you cut away what is extraneous. So symbolically, she is ready to do that. She's ready to bring the full light of her consciousness to her situation and to cut away what might be dangerous to her. But Eros wakes up and he goes, Psyche, you've ruined it. You've just ruined it. I can't stay with you now. And he flies off. And of course, she's just really upset by this. I've been reading an interesting biography of Margaret Fuller, who was a very famous woman transcendentalist, not so well known today, but who edited all of the writings of the transcendentalist writers of the 19th century, Thoreau and Emerson, Louisa May Alcott's father, Bronson Alcott, in a magazine that was called The Dial. And she got into a discussion with Ralph Waldo Emerson about the interpretation, especially of this part of the story. And it was fascinating to me that Emerson took a much more traditional religious view. I mean, he was a minister. He helped start the Unitarian Church, which was radical for its time. But his interpretation was very much that Psyche disobeying what her husband said was very much like the Garden of Eden, and that if she had only not disobeyed, everything would have been perfect. Margaret Fuller took, which was much more of a Jungian standpoint on it, which, because this is long before Jung. And she said, no, Psyche needed to know, to have a real relationship with whatever it is that you love, or whoever it is you love, you have to really know who it is. And I thought that was really interesting that she tuned into that a good 100 years before Jung. So anyway, Psyche now knows who she's married to, but she's desolate because he's rejected her. He's gone off. So she leaves the palace and she wanders around and she makes her way to different temples of various goddesses where she helps them in various things. And they all like her and they say, but Psyche, your quarrel is not with us. Your quarrel is with Aphrodite. You're going to have to go to Aphrodite and have her help fix this. So eventually, Psyche makes her way to the temple of the goddess of love and beauty. And Aphrodite says, about time. About time. And Psyche says, how can I make this right? And this is where her tests begin, her undergoing, her suffering. And first of all, she's beset by two of the handmaidens of the goddess of love and beauty, which are Worry and Sadness, who kind of beat her up pretty bad. And then she says, if you want to be reunited with my son, there's some tasks I'm going to set you. And I'm not sure whether she says there are the 4 tasks up front or she just keeps giving her different ones. But the first task is she's brought to this warehouse or storehouse where there are all different kinds of seeds, just a mountain of them. And she says, and Aphrodite says, I'm going to a party. By tomorrow morning, you have to sort all of those seeds. There's barley and millet and lentils. And they're in this huge pile. And she takes off. And Psyche just looks at this and goes, she's ready just to despair. She's absolutely just ready to despair. And one of the interesting things about this myth is that every time she is faced with something that's going to test her, her initial thought is, I can't do it. I just can't do it. I have no idea where to begin. And sometimes when we're tested, that is our first reaction. It's a very normal human reaction. Where do I begin? And the wonderful thing is that there are always things in nature that seem to take pity on her or who give her advice. And I think that that's an important thing. Sometimes you can find the answers in nature. And so an army of ants comes to her disposal and say, we'll help you, Psyche. And overnight, they all come together and they sort out the seeds into their right piles. And from a Jungian's perspective, this is when you're faced with something and you're faced with questions about where your path is in life, you have to sort out the possibilities. You have to ask a lot of questions. You have to decide what is extraneous and you have to decide what matters. Again, connect to what is most meaningful, and you put things in different piles. That can mean making lists, so that you can get your thoughts on paper, or it can mean other things. And we're going to do, in our meditation, we're going to do something that addresses that. Anyway, Aphrodite comes back, sees the piles, and she's furious. She's like, somebody gave you help. I don't know who it is, but I don't like it, and I'm going to give you another task. And so Psyche takes a deep breath. The next task is she has to go into where the rams of the sun are. And Aphrodite says, I want you to collect wool from their hides so I can make myself a coat. And of course, they're golden rams, so it's made from spun gold. And so Psyche goes out and she sees where these rams are, and they're very aggressive. They are headbutting each other. It's just play to them, but they're headbutting each other, and she knows that she can't go into the center of them without getting hurt. And rams are symbolic of power. They're often symbolic of power in the outside world. And for many of us, especially when we're trying to establish our own sense of personal power, and especially if it's a new thing for us, it's not always good to throw ourselves into the most challenging situation that we possibly can to exercise our power. And so once again, she feels the sense of despair. What do I do now? So she goes back and sits by the river. And this is a river that earlier in the story that she had tried to throw herself into, and the river had thrown her back and said, no, you can't give up. You cannot give up. And so she's sitting at the river trying to think of what to do, and a reed talks to her. And reeds are what you make musical instruments of. And so it has a voice and it can talk to her. And because it is because it grows in water, it symbolizes both a connection to both the earthly and the kind of spiritual creativity. And the reed says to her, Psyche, you don't have to go straight into the middle of these rams. Let's think about this a minute. Why don't you wait until it's dark when they're asleep? And then you can pick up all of the wool that is caught on the briars and fences, and you'll collect what you need. And so Psyche does what he says. She waits until it's quiet. And sometimes that's what you have to do when you're trying to make a decision. You have to you have to wait until it's quiet. She gathers up enough wool to satisfy Aphrodite. But of course, Aphrodite still isn't satisfied. And Aphrodite says, all right, I don't know what's going on. I don't know how you're able to do all this stuff. But here's the next thing. I want you to get some water from this particular stream. And so she takes her to this stream. And it is a stream that goes from the highest peak down to the underworld and then rotates up again. And so it's the symbol of the water of life. And unfortunately, it is guarded by dragons and serpents. And there is no way, again, that she can access this without basically losing her life. And so she's sitting there trying to figure it out. And Zeus takes pity on her, Zeus, the king of the gods, and he sends an eagle to her. And the eagle says, "Give me the flask, and I will fill it for you." And so an eagle symbolizes being able to get a higher perspective on things. So he swoops in, he gets the water, he brings it back, and she's done the third task. The fourth and final task is the one that really upsets Psyche the most. Because Aphrodite says, "I need you to get some beauty ointment for me. I've been worried so much about my son and about this whole situation. I need some beauty ointment. And you're going to have to go to the underworld, to the world of the dead, and bring some back for me." And Psyche thinks, she just wants me dead. She just wants me dead because nobody living ever goes to the underworld and comes back alive. And so she goes up to a tower. Again, she's ready to throw herself off the top of the tower. And the tower says, "Hold on a minute here. There's a way you can do this. This is what you need to do. First of all, you need 2 honey cakes. One to feed the Cerberus, who is the 3-headed dog who guarded the gates of the underworld. One to feed him to let you in, and one to feed him to let you out. And you also need 2 coins. One to give to Charon, or Charon, I'm not sure how to say that, who is the ferryman who ferried you between the river, between the land of the living and the land of the dead. One to pay him on the way out, and one to pay him on the way back." And that was a Greek thing. When somebody died, you actually put a coin under their tongue. So the person could pay the ferryman to get them to the land of the dead. So she says, "Okay, I'm all ready to go." And he goes, "Wait." The tower goes, "Wait, there's one more thing. You are going to be asked 3 times for help. 3 times you're going to be asked for help. You can't give the help." And because Psyche is a tender-hearted person, this seems really hard to her. How can I say no? So Psyche takes off, and sure enough, she meets three different beings that need her help. The first is an old man, very old man, with a donkey that's lame, and the wheel's fallen off. And he says, "I must get my goods to market, otherwise my whole family is going to starve." And she says, "Oh," and she remembers, "I'm not supposed to help." So she leaves him and she goes on. And the next thing she sees are 3 women. They could be the Fates, spinning. And their loom is broken, or their spinning wheel is broken. And they ask her for help. And they remind her perhaps of her sisters, her mother. And they say, "We must finish this, otherwise something terrible is going to happen." And she has to steel her heart and say, "I'm sorry, I can't help you." And then she finally gets to the banks where the ferryman is going to carry her over. And she gives him the coin, and she gets in the boat. And then she sees this drowning man. And this drowning man can't make it over because he didn't bring his own coin. And he says, you've got 1 coin, you're getting over there, give me the coin, your coin." And she says, "I can't, it's to help get me back. I can't give it to you." And she gets over, she feeds the dog with one of the honey cakes. She goes to Persephone, who's very sympathetic to her plight, and Persephone gives her the beauty ointment. She goes back, she feeds the dog, she gives the other coin, and she makes it back to Aphrodite. Symbolically, this can be, especially for anyone who is a helper or a healer, this can be the most challenging task of all. And it's particularly relevant for people who are in the underworld in some way, through addiction, through depression, through any one of those things, through facing cancer. There are times in life when you are on your quest where you have to say no to people because you have a limited amount of energy. I think it's very symbolic. Psyche doesn't have a place to hold any of these things. She's literally holding them in her hands, the oatcakes and the coins. And these are her sustenance. This is what will get her through the quest. And it's a little bit like energy at certain times in your life, where you have energy to help, where you don't have energy to help. And if you were on a really sacred quest to get yourself out of addiction, to get yourself out of depression, if you're facing cancer, any of the big questions in life, or sometimes just you're going towards something joyful, but you need to put all of your energy there, and you can't help. And so saying no is part of your sacred quest. And this Psyche does successfully. However, on her way back, she's very curious about this beauty ointment, and she has been told she is not to open the jar. And of course, you know what happens. She opens the jar, and she is overcome. She swoons. She goes unconscious again. And so there she is, and it looks like she's going to fail the final thing. Well, at this point, Eros suddenly grows a pair and stands up to his mother, because he's been watching all of this from a distance, and he goes, "That's enough. That's enough tests." And I always think this is really an interesting part of the story. Sometimes what you love or who you love needs to mature and to be ready for the gifts of who you are, and what you are bringing to a relationship. And so Eros comes to her, he kisses her, he wakes her up, he takes her to Olympus. He basically says to all of the gods, listen, she's been through hell, literally. She went to hell and back. And I think it's time that I married her for real, have a real marriage. And so Aphrodite isn't too pleased, but she has to go along with it. And Psyche is given the gift of immortality. She's allowed to drink the mead that makes her immortal. And eventually she gives birth. And what she gives birth to, which I think is very important, you've got the soul, Psyche the soul, you've got Eros, who's love. When who you are joins with who or what you love, you end up giving birth to joy. And that was the name of her daughter, Joy. So, what I would like to do, it's interesting the synchronicity of things. I had a complimentary consultation for a young woman this week, and she reminded me very much of Psyche. I mean, she has really gone to hell and back. She's in a relationship where, oh Lord, her husband had an affair, he's unemployed, he spent the money that they were going to buy a house with, and she doesn't know if she should stay with him. She's working 3 jobs. They're getting food from a food shelf, and she's really gone to hell and back over this. And because I only had a short time with her, I took her, and it was pretty obvious that so much of what she was trying to make decisions about, she felt was dependent on what he did. And because he isn't in the coaching relationship, there's not a lot I can do with what he's doing. Sort of like, there's not much that Psyche can do about Eros, until he figures out what he needs to do. So we focused in on what she needed, and I took her through a meditation to get her in touch with her soul. And I asked her to ask her soul what she needed to do to take care of herself. So we went through a number of things. And the final thing I said, and if your soul gave you a gift, it could be a person, it could be a thing. What is it that your soul gives to you to remind you that you have love from your soul to sustain you? And the image that she got was a bird. And I said, okay, and what kind of bird? And she said, a mourning dove. Now, mourning doves, you may know, often mate for life. They are also the symbol of the goddess of love and beauty, Aphrodite. That is the animal that's most sacred to her. So I thought it was very interesting that I was coming here today to talk about the goddess of love and beauty and how she manifests in people's lives. So I'd like to go into the meditation now. So I invite you to close your eyes and uncross your feet. And just start to focus on your breathing for a little bit. Breathing in and out, and in and out. And I want you to imagine that you've got roots coming from your feet, where your feet are on the floor. Roots that go down into the earth to bring up all the nourishment and wisdom of the earth. And I want you to imagine that you've got lines of light coming from the top of your head. That are reaching up to the heavens and bringing down heavenly, divine love, light, and wisdom. And I want you to imagine that all of that energy from the earth and from the heavens is coming into your body and mixing and mingling for the absolutely perfect balance for you. And I want you to imagine that it's coming in and mixing in your heart and going to all parts of your body, to your feet, so that your feet are relaxed, your ankles are relaxed, your calves are relaxed, your knees are relaxed, your thighs are relaxed, your glutes are relaxed. All of your internal organs, your stomach and your spleen are relaxed. Your heart is relaxed, your lungs. And this sense of peace is traveling up into your neck and down your arms, into your fingers. And it's also traveling up into your neck and to your head, so that your tongue is heavy in your mouth, your eyes are heavy in your head, and you're surrounded in a bubble of light. And I want you to invite in your soul, your own personal psyche, to be with you through this journey. And to invite in divine love, eros. And I want you to imagine that, like Psyche in her first task, that you are in a storehouse filled with grain. And the ants have come to help you sort this grain in your life that symbolically is going to represent decisions that you have made and that you need to make. And I want you to imagine that we're going to take this huge, maybe overwhelming pile of different kinds of seeds, and we're going to put them into 3 different piles. One pile to your left is going to symbolize your past. And the ants are going to take the seeds that represent your past and put them in one pile. And then in front of you, they're going to put a pile of seeds that represent your present, where you are right now. And then there's another set of seeds that represents the future and your unrealized potential to your right. Now, in the first pile of seeds representing your past, there are seeds that did not come to fruition, they didn't sprout. And there are seeds that could still sprout potentially. I want you to imagine that the ants can carry away from your past anything you would like to let go of, anything from your past that you want to let go of. They're just going to carry them away where they can be recycled, what in shamanic terms they call mikwe, recycled back to the earth to be used for another purpose. So that the only thing left in the past pile are things that you want to remember and want to keep. And now the ants are going to help you sort out the present pile. And there may be an awful lot of things on your to-do list, or things that you want to achieve right now. And I want you to imagine that if there's anything in your present that you want to let go of, whether it's emotions that are holding you back, or tasks that are no longer meaningful to you, I want you to imagine that the ants can take those away as well to be recycled. And then finally, there's the future pile. And this is all of the potential. And I want you to look at what you could do, what you might do. And I want you to take from that pile the things that are most meaningful, the things that are most meaningful, and bring them into the present. The things that you know you want to work on. And if you like, you can ask the ants from the present and future pile to arrange the seeds into a message to you. A message that your soul wants to give you. Words that will help you, sustain you in the times ahead. And from each of these piles, I want you to take what is most meaningful, the seeds that are most meaningful, and just put them in your pocket to carry with you. And now I'd like you to imagine that you're at the second task of Psyche, with all of the golden rams inside this pen. And they've gone to sleep. And so you're able to collect all of this spun gold, this powerful spun gold. And I want you to imagine that it magically turns into an article of clothing with a name tag in it that has your name. And that embroidered in this article of clothing, whether it's hat or a coat, there is a word that's embroidered into it that symbolizes personal power. What you need to do to be more personally powerful in your own life. And that is embroidered into this golden article of clothing. And now I want you to imagine that you're in front of this river that's guarded by serpents. And the eagle has come to fill your flask with water. And he fills the flask with water that symbolizes creativity and fluidity. And when he brings the flask back, etched in the flask with his talons, he has etched a word. And that word is the word that you need to remember to be more fluid and creative in your own life. Notice what the word is that he's etched there. And now I want you to imagine that you're on your way to the underworld to get this beauty ointment. And you're going to come in front of something or someone that is asking you to share some of your energy with that you need to say no to. It could be symbolic, or it could be an actual person or situation. And I want you to imagine that you find, with this personal power and creativity, that you are able to say no in a very gentle way. To say no. Now I want you to imagine that you have crossed the river, you have paid the ferryman, and there's a drowning person that you also have to say no to, and that you say gently no to that person or situation. You arrive at the other side, you feed the dog with the honey cake, you get the beauty ointment, and you recross the river. But you're curious to see what is in this little box of ointment. And when you open the lid, on the inside of the lid, there is a word or sentence. And what it says is, your inner beauty is best expressed through, and you fill in the blank. What is your inner beauty best expressed through? And I want you to imagine now that you fall into deeper relaxation. And I want you to imagine that who and what you love comes and gently kisses you on the forehead and the cheeks and on the lips. And that you are wafted up to Olympus. And there you get to share your story with all your loved ones and with all the people who are most important in your life. And that they are supportive. I want you to imagine as you share the story of being able to sort through your past, your present, and your future, to find the creative waters of life, to find something that is your personal power, and to find the ways of expressing your inner beauty. And all of that helps connect you to what is most meaningful for you in your life. And now, very gently, in your own time and in your own space, I want you to imagine that you're bringing the wisdom from this journey, the love from your soul, and the love from who and what you love back into this room. And it helps change your DNA so that you find it easy to be who you authentically are, to express your inner beauty, and to connect to what is most meaningful in your own life. And when you're ready, you can wiggle your fingers and toes and take in a cleansing breath. And bring your consciousness back to the room. Namaste.